Maybe listen to me speak, yeah. No matter what, just let it go.
Pop, persuadable. What is going on, boo-boos? All right. How do you disinfect your hands during Christmas when you are unable to wash them? You use sanitizer. Before we get into this video, this is a casual match, so, no harsh criticisms on the survivors. They're probably playing characters that they're trying to have fun with, so this is not a rank match, and everyone fucking collectively hates White Sand Street Asylum, whatever, so the hell with this match. So today I wanted to talk to you, first of all, happy belated Merry Christmas. I was going to come out with a Christmas video, but I was like, I've been home and I'd rather spend time with family. So here we are today, and I'd like to share a little bit of a Christmas story with you that kind of opened my eyes up. And it's not really my own. It is, but it isn't. So one of the things as an occupational therapy clinician that people don't realize what I do, I personally specialize in what we call skilled nursing facilities, all right? So a lot of the time, think of the elderly or anyone in between who goes to the hospital, they get injured, and then it's up to the hospital's job to figure out, like, can you go home or do you need to continue rehabbing in a skilled nursing facility, right? Think of an elderly woman who lives alone, who breaks her hip and she can't really walk and no one can take care of her. Therefore, after she's stabilized and they fix the hip, they don't send her home. She can't walk or take care of herself, right? So she goes to a skilled nursing facility. Think somewhat subacute. A lot of my patients will be in my buildings anywhere between 2 weeks to 3 months. And of course, sometimes I have to make the decision to, have them in a nursing home forever or an assistance forever. Now, a lot of the times, one of the biggest diagnoses that I deal with and work with is dementia. And I don't want to get too technical into this video, but a lot of the times there's a difference between a mild cognitive impairment and dementia. So as an example, say if somebody, falls, they get injured, and during the ER workup and during the orthopedic consult, they go in there, they fix their hip, and then they realize, this person, we could see that they're a little cognitively off. Like, we don't know how bad it is. It might be really bad. It might not be. And so they'll write that in their report, like some cognitive concern. So when they go to a skilled nursing facility, it's also my job to figure out, okay, are they just loopy because of the anesthesia? Is this a mild cognitive impairment, which just means, it can be a little spacey and forget some things once in a while, but it's not really that big of a deal. They can fully be functional, go home. Or are we starting to see the early signs of dementia, especially with their age? Are they 65, 75, 55, right? So I work a lot with dementia. And there was this one person that came in, and she was more so, I would say, middle stage dementia. And I'd say more in the middle stage, but more towards the later stage phase. And there's different types of dementia that affects patients differently. That's another thing that I will sometimes consult with neurologists. So a lot of the times, if it's not shown on like an MRI scan, a lot of time you'll hear of a thing called vascular dementia, where they can look at the brain and they can really see that there's vascular changes, and they can see there's cognitive deficits because of it. A lot of the times, though, dementia is more of a diagnosis where it's a process of elimination, and then it's my job to go in there and work with this patient. And by doing so, you can kind of figure out what type of dementia you're working with if the doctor's not always so sure, right? Different dementias affect patients differently. Some dementias will affect patients' motor skills, right? So they'll start having difficulties with coordination, or they'll have difficulty walking. But then other patients with dementia, their walking is completely fine, but it's more so of their orientation, like, where am I? Or one of the biggest warning signs is a thing called topographical disorientation. This is somebody who's driving, and they're driving home, and next thing you know, they're in New York City because they took a wrong turn and completely got lost, right? So different types of dementia can affect people differently, and based on that, those diagnostic or prognostic features, you can kind of get a good idea of what type of dementia we're working with and how can we help this patient get home. Okay, so I had a patient who was more like towards the middle stage. I mentioned that previously. Sorry for repeating myself. And it was really difficult to build a rapport with this relationship, this patient, because she didn't really know where she was, and she was scared. And she doesn't remember falling. She doesn't remember breaking her arm. So she's in this building that she's unfamiliar with, speaking to a guy, me, that she has no idea who I am. And that can bring up like a lot of sort of the state, like fight or flight response. So one of the other things with my job is that we go to school for over 7.5 years of psychology. People don't realize that. So I have an incredible amount of training in psychology. Some occupational therapists only work in mental health. So we just have a little bit of a different approach than psychologists, but the same fundamentals are there in terms of active listening and approaching people. So I slowly talk to this patient. I orient them. I do these things. And she shares this story with me about how, this was a Christmas story. She shared the story with me about how she misses Christmas, and she remembers this one Christmas where she was outside of a church. Her and her husband were in their 40s, and she remembers that he gave her the best kiss of her life. They were already married for X amount of years, and she just really brought this up. I don't remember how it came up, but I remember like she was sharing this story with me, right? Dementia affects people differently, and sometimes long-term memory is completely intact and short-term memory is not, which is different from orientation, etc. And she shared this story with me, and she goes into this elaborative story about how it was one of the best Christmases of her entire life. And it was a very simple Christmas, but it was a Christmas at this stage of her life where she could appreciate the small things, the simple things. And she told me that throughout her life, she's sure that she's had plenty of good Christmases filled with a lot of adventures and different things. But she doesn't remember all of them, but she just remembers this one Christmas. It was the one memory that she really could revert to. And I didn't think much of it at this point. I'm like, all right, I have something now. I definitely have something. And the next day I go in, she doesn't really remember me. Again, we don't really know why. Is this the dementia? Is this the effect of anesthesia? Is she getting an infection like a UTI that can affect cognition? We don't really know why she's having the cognitive deficits, because she's a newer patient. So it did end up being that she was more of that later stage, middle stage dementia where it's affecting the cognition and affecting short-term memory. And so the next day, doesn't really remember me. And so sometimes I'll tell a patient that I see them all the time. Sometimes I'll tell them, hey, this is what's going on. You don't remember me. And that can upset patients. And then other patients, they appreciate it. So you have to know how to approach patients, and each patient is different. There's no one universal way to approach them. And I told, so with this specific patient, I decided to orient them and let them know, listen, this is what's going on. You got injured. This is why you can't move. This is why you're in a lot of pain. I've met you before. And right now, your brain's playing a few tricks on you. Don't worry, this happens to me every single day. But in your case, you're not really remembering me. As an example, I would like to tell you about this time where you had the most fantastic Christmas with your husband. It was outside of the church, and she looked at me and she smiled and she goes, oh, yes, that's my favorite Christmas of all time. That's when I remembered that the simple things in life is really what can bring you happiness and joy, and not the extravagant things. That's what she said to me. And I kept using this over and over and over every single day going in there, because it would instantly make her calm, because in her mind, I shared this information with this guy. I think I like him. And I would use this tool over and over in order to engage with her and to get her to do the things that I needed to do to get her strong, even though her mind wasn't, in a sense, fully 100%. I need the bones and the muscles to be as 100% as possible, so this person is no longer living in pain. Well, after this, this patient ended up having to live in a home, but we were able to really get her strong enough where after a few months she wasn't in as much pain and she could live a quality of life. Remember, when you're in pain, you can't eat, you can't sleep. It affects your life in so many different ways, and we were able to give her a quality of life. But the way that this has impacted me now, especially after my my recent events and where I'm at is it made me realize that Christmas was a day that I never really truly appreciated. I think it was because I was rough around the edges as a kid. I was kind of a troublemaker. I think I didn't really understand how important these moments can be if you have a healthy family or a supportive family, right? We don't all have that, so you can't push the whole holidays. You got to spend it with family. It doesn't apply to everybody. But in my case, it reminded me that being a good person and being attentive and being there for the people that you love, even on the most smallest of days, can leave such a lasting memory. And I feel that is a beautiful thought. You can't convince people that you're important enough to stay in your life, and you can't convince people that the things that you do for them are worth keeping you around. But you gotta hope and pray that the people that you love are smart enough to appreciate you for who you are in all the small things. I wonder to this day if her husband, who was deceased, ever knew how important that Christmas was. I'd like to think he did, but even if he didn't, I know that he does now, and that makes me happy. And so in the small moments of life, I hope that you carry yourself in a way where things are meaningful, because regardless of all of it, you deserve to be happy. So on this Christmas, I had a good time with my family, the small moments in our home. We did the tiny things, and I feel very happy about that. I'm not sure if I would have 10 years ago, where I needed all of this stimuli to keep me going, but these days the peace and tranquility and calmness, especially as my parents get older, means a lot to me. Thank you for listening. You all have a beautiful day. Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.